Hello, and welcome to Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem.
This is the podcast about murders and so much more. We will talk about anything strange, anything that goes bump in the night, and pretty much anything that amuses us.
And on that note, we need to mention that this podcast is not safe for work or delicate ears, so do be discerning who you listen to it with.
We also want to let you know that you can find us on social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram, so look for us there.
I am Shannon Lawrence. I am a writer, mom, wife, student, procrastinator, and you can find me at thewarriormuse.com.
My name is MB Partlow. I am a writer, an avid reader, an organizer extraordinaire, a mom to kids, cats, and a dog, and I call bullshit when I see it.
Hello, everyone. So we are here today with author John H. Mudgett. He wrote Crazy Is As Crazy Does, The Life of a Serial Killer. And we're going to have you tell our audience a little bit about you.
Well, hi. First of all, thanks for having me on. I appreciate that. A little bit about myself. I'm a father of 3. I'm retired military, and I'm a novice writer. This book I actually decided to write. Well, I always talked about writing a book when this idea came into my head back in 1995, 96, but I didn't actually publish it until 2019. So you could see I'm a procrastinator as well. So anyway, that's pretty much, I'm a loving uncle. I'm a fun guy for the most part. I like hiking and biking and walking and pretty much sharing stories, especially, I don't know. This is a story I always felt like I needed to share. I always thought it was entertaining, and the people that I would tell it about, they're like, yeah, you should write a book, but it's easier said than done, writing a book. But anyway, I think I'm getting off topic. That's just a little bit about myself. So sorry about that.
The beauty of a podcast, you totally can get off topic. Oh yeah. I think it's funny because people expect, if you've written something dark, if you've written a thriller or horror or something like that I don't know, they expect you to be a freaky person in person, right? And then you're a dad. I'm a mom. I write a lot of horror. And if people see me in person, they're like, huh.
Yeah, they expect you to show up looking like Marilyn Manson in full makeup.
Yeah, something like that.
It's like, sorry, I like floral prints, it's okay.
Yeah, I'm really not a socio or a psychopath. I'm really not. So
have you taken the test?
You got me there. My kids might tell you I'm a little bit of a psychopath, but other than that,
You have to score a 30 out of 40 on the psychopathy test.
Is that the one that Ed Kemper made? Or
that's the US scale. If you score a 30 or above, you're considered a psychopath.
Yeah, but he did one Ed Kemper did one that was, now I don't remember what it was. He did the psychological profile for something while he was in the psych ward because they thought he was so magnificent. But I can't remember which one it was. I just thought it was so funny. I was like, you guys just, wow, hook, line, and sinker for Kemper there. Mm-hmm. But
he's an interesting character too. I love that. Yeah. Well, I shouldn't say love Ed, but he intrigues me for sure.
Right. Yes. We get, true crime podcast listeners have to get that. We don't mean that. We're like, wow, he's a great guy.
Yeah, I know.
So tell us about, you said that this was the book that you've had this idea since about 95 or 96. And first of all, it's not even unusual that it took that long to have your first book out. It's pretty standard for most people that you kind of start getting into it and learning it. And eventually you actually write it instead of just talking about it or thinking about it. But yeah, so the character, it's John Goodman, right?
Yes.
So
fictional.
He's his own bad guy, but he also runs into a bunch of people, right?
Correct.
Okay. So yeah, tell us a little bit about that. Because we're each going to be doing one of the serial killers that he runs into in the book today.
Well, it even says in like my preface of the book, back when this idea first popped in my head, I was watching movies like Sling Blade and Copycat Killer with Sigourney Weaver. And I was thinking to myself, copycat, why don't they just have a guy that met these people? And then see, I can't even think. Forrest Gump came out, and I'm like, there you go. If I could have a serial killer, like, you know, instead of a happy-go-lucky Forrest Gump, I could have a serial killer who meets his own singer, who meets his own people, who kind of have an influence on his life. And that's where I took this book, like, because it always intrigued me how one becomes that way. What in life happens so badly that you become that way? Is it nature or nurture? And so if you read the book, you can kind of see who his father, who it wasn't his father, but who his father was related to. So it's kind of a bloodline there. And then the events that happened to him as a young child and the things that he liked to do, like kill animals, and like most serial killers do. So as he started growing up, and he would, you know, go places and meet different people, like he met, should I tell you all the people he met?
Sure.
So as he was growing up, he met the Zodiac killer, for one, and they became friends. And you know how the Zodiac likes to write to the police and things like that in his ciphers. Well, he was kind of not only talking to police, but he was also talking to my guy. You see, so that's plausible. Everything in here is plausible. It's not like over the edge. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's plausible that he went to school with this guy. And then I won't go into too much detail, but he's in the service at one point, and he meets Charles Whitman. I don't know if everybody's familiar with him, but he shot, 20 or so people from the Texas A&M Tower.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's how he met him, was through the service. But there's other little things in there that Charles did to him. I thought it was cool to put in there that how Charles picked out his victims from the tower. You know what I mean? He was actually toying with John Goodman by doing that. He was shooting people that John Goodman was walking by. So it's kind of, you know what I mean? So,
yeah.
So what kind of those actions right there, what kind of psyche did that put on John Goodman? How did that change him at that point? And after that, what did he do? And he started hitchhiking to get away from the scene. And then he runs into, I don't know how many people know of Jim Morrison. Most of them might just say, oh, he's the singer of the Doors. But if you read like some of his autobiographies that had come out and things like that, or just listen to some of his lyrics, you can tell he was dark and demented in his own way. I'm not saying he was a serial killer by any means, but I think he had something, and he had a high IQ too. We'll go into all that later, I think. But
yeah, we were intrigued by that you were going to talk about Jim Morrison a bit.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about him a little bit because a lot of people that read my book, if you don't know who I'm talking about, it won't make sense to you, and then I get bad reviews. So,
oh yeah.
But if you know what I'm talking about and who I'm talking about, then you understand, and you give me a little credit. Maybe not 5 stars, but you give me a little credit, because like I said, this is my first book. I'm a novice writer. I'm in no way would I consider myself an author per se. Like, I might try to write 1 or 2 more books in the next few years, but other than that, maybe one day I'll be able to call myself a full-fledged author. But right now, I'm just, I just wanted to get this story out, and I had time to do it, so I finally did it. So he meets people like that. Then he also meets, he doesn't meet John Wayne Gacy, but he actually lived in John's house, and he left some of the things behind in John's house that John started using on his own victims. And then, you know how serial killers like to have their own trophies, if you will. Basically, Gacy took the credit for the things, the tools that he had created. If that makes sense, And then, of course, he likes to hitchhike. So he, we were talking about Big Ed a few minutes ago, Ed Kemper. And of course, Ed Kemper picks up my guy, and they have an interesting conversation. It goes on from there. And then, how Ted Bundy killed 2 people in one day in Lake Sammamish?
Yeah.
And everybody's like, how could he really do that? Well, maybe he didn't. Maybe he ran into my guy who was doing some crazy shit and was like, you know what? I'm going to mess with this guy, and I'm going to become friends with this guy. So they befriended each other that way. That makes sense,
Yeah, that's nice and creepy.
It's the
Yeah, nice.
it basically is the perfect book for people who are into true crime or who have a fascination with serial killers, because you get a kick out of each interaction, each way that you've spun it.
Right. And it, like I said, it's plausible. I mean, it's not far-fetched. At least I don't think it is. So far, it's pretty plausible, right? And then you know how some killers have like God complexes and things like that.
Mhm.
Well, he runs in. I don't know how many people are familiar with the San Ysidro massacre, McDonald's massacre, but his name was James Huberty. I'm going to talk about him as well if we have time, hopefully. But so that made my guy get a God complex, and I'll tell you why when we get into it. And who else did he meet? Mean Eileen's a chapter. Eileen Warnos. He meets her. That's why, because she's the type of people he hunts. So how could he not meet her? You know, so that's pretty much the people, the true life people that are in this book. But it's you know, it's just a little bit more than it just makes John Goodman who he is, if that makes sense, by meeting these different people. But yeah, I wanted to put celebrity status people in there so you could kind of have something to, I guess I call them Easter eggs, basically.
Okay.
I wanted to throw Easter eggs in there.
Yes, makes sense. And
Copycat killer by, you know, with Sigourney Weaver. So there you go.
I love that movie.
Stop basting on it, Shannon. I'm sorry. I like Breakdown better than that movie. Remember Breakdown?
Yeah.
Truck driver killers.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was a cool one. I thought that was pretty good. I wish I had thought of that one.
Is that the one with Kurt Russell?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I forget his name. He died already. Bless his soul. He died young of a heart attack. Forget his name.
It's been a long time since I saw that.
Yeah.
I don't remember who else is in it.
I don't either.
But thank you for the information. Let's go ahead and hop in.
All right.
And B will start. She's going to do her piece.
Okay. I'm good. Yes. So I'm going to talk about, since you told us who was the characters that appear, I chose to talk about Eileen Warnos, who is usually mistakenly, but she's often referred to as the first female serial killer.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. And what was really interesting to me was, because we've talked about, well, obviously we've talked about a lot of murder. A woman is not considered a serial killer if she's doing it for financial gain. So all those women at the turn of the century who were poisoning fucking everybody, they're not considered serial killers because they were doing it for financial gain.
False.
Well,
I disagree.
I'm in no position to make these designations. Nobody asked my opinion.
All right, dear designators, you're full of shit.
So a lot of people are aware of the Eileen Warnos story because the film Monster came out in 2003 with Charlize Theron, and I think she might have won the Academy Award for it. She was nominated. I can't remember if she won. So, and I have not seen that movie. So I'm not going to say, oh, it's excellent. It probably is excellent because Charlize Theron is a great actress, but Hollywood doesn't get anybody's story right. That's not their job. It's not a documentary. It's a movie. It's a story. So if you watch that movie, just do it and you want the real story. There are lots of documentaries out there. So take that with a grain of salt. So Eileen Warnos was born in 1956. And frankly, from the way she grew up, it's a wonder she didn't kill more people. That's what really reading her story. I was like, she should have I'm surprised she didn't kill everybody she encountered. Because everybody she should have been able to trust in her childhood betrayed her. Yeah. Betrayed their responsibility to her. So her parents, Diane Warnos and Leo Pittman, got married in 1954. Diane was 14 and Dale was 16. So just wrap your minds around that. This was not in 1911. This was in 1954. 14 and 16, they got married. A year later, they had a son, Keith. And 11 months later, Eileen was born. So 16-year-old Diane had filed for divorce 2 months before Eileen was born. So here you have a single mom who is 16 years old and 2 infants. Mm-hmm. That right there would make a lot of people cry. She never knew her father. that in and of itself is not, I mean, that happens to a lot of people, but he was in prison when she was born. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia and he was convicted of sex crimes against children. When he hanged himself in 1969, he was serving a life sentence for raping a 7-year-old.
Oh, lovely.
So yeah, I can't imagine why her mother wanted to divorce him. In January of 1960, when Eileen was almost 4 years old, so her brother would have been 5, the mom dropped Eileen and Keith off at her parents' house and never came back. Her parents' names were Lori, that was the grandpa, and Britta, that was grandma, adopted Eileen and Keith, and they never disclosed to the children that they were their grandparents, not their parents. And Eileen found out when she was around 12. I don't remember how she found out.
Oh, good age for a girl to find out by the preteen years.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That is a good time. Yeah, because hormones don't make the entire world crazy. So you would hope in a fairy tale Disney kind of movie, there would be, warm, fuzzy pajamas and freshly baked cookies. However, Britta was an alcoholic. Both grandparents were abusive. Lori had a handy trick. He liked to force Eileen to strip before he beat her for punishment.
Yeah.
So she would either have to drop her pants and bend over the kitchen table. And I know nobody can see my hand gestures, but I'm gesturing away. Or he would make her strip down and lay spread eagled on the bed so he could beat her with a belt.
Yeah.
That sounds also like
so a little extra humiliation. For it.
And then it was a short skip from there to sexually abusing his granddaughter and apparently allowing some of his friends to do so as well. So at the age of 11, Eileen was in trouble in school for exchanging sexual favors for beer and food and drugs and cigarettes.
Gosh, I wonder why she learned to do that.
I can't even imagine. They believe she had a sexual relationship with her brother. At the age of 14, she became pregnant, and the strongest case was made that the father was one of her grandfather's friends. So she was sent to a home for unwed mothers where she gave the baby up for adoption. She was never allowed to even see or hold the baby before she gave it up for adoption. So she never got to see her son. Shortly after that, she dropped out of school. Her grandmother died of liver failure. Her aunt believed that the grandfather had a hand in the grandmother's death.
Huh?
But then they think it's just that he wouldn't call an ambulance because he said he couldn't afford it. She was convulsing with the liver failure. So anyway, right after grandma died, he threw Eileen out of the house and she lived in the woods. He threw her out. This is in Michigan. That's not a temperate
Grimm's fairy tale.
Yeah. So, and she kept body and soul together by prostituting herself. That was how she survived. That was what she had and what she knew how to do. So I'm not going to go into, she had quite a criminal record. So I'm not going to go into all of that because there are books, there are some really good documentaries. Like John said, there is a documentary narrated by her best friend from when she was growing up, who does give it gives you a glimpse into a different person than the people who only knew her after, she began growing up. So 1976, Eileen is 20 years old and she hitchhikes to Florida, as one does. And she met 69-year-old Louis Fell, who was wealthy. He was retired. He was president of the yacht club. That's mentioned everywhere. He must have been very proud of it. President of the yacht club.
It's like, hello. You don't need to know my name. Just know that I'm president of the yacht club.
And he was looking for a young blonde woman on his arm, and that's what he got. So, so they got really quickly engaged and married. And it was really funny because it hit all the society pages in the local newspapers. But after beating him with his own cane, which I don't know, that really strikes me funny, the marriage was annulled after 6 weeks.
Okay.
So it didn't last very long. Now, there is an upcoming movie that does not look to be based at all in reality that details Eileen going to Florida and meeting this man and marrying him. And it makes her look like a sophisticated blonde bombshell gold digger, which we know she was not. But that's coming out. It might have been finished because I saw the trailer for it. I didn't think it looked very good, but what do I know? So in the middle of all this, when she's getting married and getting divorced, her brother Keith died of esophageal cancer. She did get, I know, she got $10,000 from his life insurance, but blew through it really quickly. Part of it was on a car that she then wrecked. She drifted around. She was arrested in Colorado.
They were all arrested. Everybody, like half of the serial killers, like the major ones you look at some point came through Colorado.
Yes.
I know that, yeah.
Yeah.
And apparently she was really good at adapting her name, picking up a different name, picking up a different identity. So she was building up a criminal record, sometimes under her own name, sometimes not. She robbed a convenience store. And it's unclear if she was wearing her underwear or a bikini because the stories vary. She was arrested for disturbing the peace after throwing a cue ball at a bartender's head. And I'm like, oh, don't fuck with the bartender. That's really not. No, you lose all your sympathy when
that's true.
When you target the bartender. She was hitchhiking around. She was trading sex for money. And she would rob anybody who gave her a ride. I mean, she stole a gun from a glove box. I think she was arrested in Colorado for, among other things, shooting out of a moving car. Which is not good because when you shoot a gun, it's really loud and a car is kind of a confined space.
But if the gun's outside.
If the gun is outside, it's better, but it's still not anyway, it's unclear. I would posit that Eileen was probably confused by her own sexuality, and it's no small surprise. After everything that she'd been through, she did have relationships with men. She was married for a brief time, but she had a couple of other longer lasting, not super long, we're talking months, relationships with men. But in 1986, she met Tyria Moore at a gay bar and entered what was her longest relationship. I want to say that lasted 4.5 years. Yeah. I mean, in the grand scope of things, that's not very long, but that was the longest relationship she had with another person. So realistically, between November of 1989 and November of 1990, she killed 7 men. And because she often stole their car and then abandoned it, they were able to, the evidence against her mounted up really quickly. There wasn't a whole lot of question. She left fingerprints in the vehicles, and the police got her girlfriend used her to elicit a confession. So I am going to talk a little bit about her victims, mostly about the first one, because I think this was what really set it off. So his name was Richard Mallory. He was 51 years old. This was November 30th of 1989. He was an electronics store owner in Clearwater, Florida. He was a convicted rapist who she claimed to have killed in self-defense. And they found his abandoned vehicle. They found his body several miles away with 2 bullets in the left lung. I mean, she was shooting people. I want to skip ahead. Yes, here it is. When she was on trial for the murder of Mallory, although virtually her entire past was admitted into evidence,
of course,
to establish the pattern, I mean, she did have a huge criminal past. The judge refused to allow any reference to the fact that Mallory's had a sociopathic history, or that he spent 8 years in prison for assault with intent to rape.
Really?
Yeah.
So they weren't allowed to say that he had assaulted and attempted to rape somebody.
Right. And that was her. And it kind of seems like she maintained, and her story changed. She did not stick to the same story. But she always maintained that he tried to rape her, or he did rape her. And the other guys, no, but she stuck with that story. So there was David Spears, age 47, who was a construction worker in Winter Garden. He was declared missing in May of 1990, and on June 1st, they found his naked body. He had been shot 6 times with a pistol. Charles Carskadden, I apologize if I butchered that pronunciation, He was 40 years old, May 31st of 1990. He was a part-time rodeo worker. They found him on June 6th. He'd been shot 9 times, and his body had been wrapped in an electric blanket. And I'm thinking, May in Florida, they weren't worried about him getting cold. And that was a big one because that was where witnesses identified Warnos as being in his car, getting out of the car, and she pawned a gun that had belonged to him. So that made the strongest connection. Peter Seams, he was 65, a retired merchant seaman. He left Jupiter, Florida, heading for Arkansas. And on July 4th of 1990, they found his car in Orange Springs. And again, Warnos was seen abandoning the car. Her palm print was on the interior door. His body was never found.
Not a master criminal.
She was not. But that's the one she hasn't been charged with because there's no body. Troy Barres, he was age 50, body found in a wooded area. He had been shot twice. Dick Humphreys, age 56. That was interesting because he was a former state child abuse investigator and former chief of police. He was fully clothed and had been shot 6 times in the head and torso. And then there was Walter Antonio, who was a trucker and a security guard, and they found his nearly naked body. He had been shot 4 times, and they found his car 5 days later. So while Eileen changed her story several times, she did admit to all of the murders. Like I said, the one she said he had raped her, but the rest, and some of them she was just like, fuck it, I did it, I killed him. She got really, really tired of being on death row and fired her counsel who was trying to file an appeal because she was like, I'm done. I can't stand living on death row any longer. While she was in jail, this was what I was talking about earlier, she was labeled a psychopath, having scored 32 out of 40 on the psychopathy checklist. Yeah. She was also diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder.
Again, those ones come up over and over and over again in serial killers.
Yeah. And there's some debate about what she did as a child that fits that typical mold we were talking about earlier. I didn't find any evidence that she, for instance, tortured or killed animals.
So that triad, which is actually bigger than a triad if you look into it more now, they don't all have to have done it.
Now, there was an incident where she and her brother started a fire, but I'm like, if I was
every kid has started a fire at some point,
exactly.
Honestly.
Her last meal was a cup of coffee. She turned down a last meal. She just wanted a cup of coffee. And her last words, I want to end with her last words. Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the rock and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus. June 6th, like the movie, big mothership and all, I'll be back. I'll be back.
All right. So one could write a ghost story about her.
I was like, damn, that was the really sad story of Eileen Warnos, who...
Yeah, she had an incredibly shitty childhood.
She did. And the system failed her at every turn. You know, it's now everybody's coming forward saying, oh yes, we knew her grandparents were these terrible people. And I'm like, well, why didn't anybody say anything?
Why didn't you do anything? Why didn't you report it? Why didn't you intervene? I wouldn't admit that if I hadn't turned that in.
If you hadn't
never admit that. Jeez. All right. Well, thank you. And it's over to you.
Well, I remember all that when it was going on because I was actually stationed. I grew up in Florida, actually, but I was stationed in Orlando, Florida at the time.
Oh, wow.
Between 89 and 93. So I kind of remember some of that stuff as it was happening, you know, when they found the bodies and guys were going missing, you know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, but, and the other thing too, that you were saying with Eileen, her long relationship, I saw it on the documentary. I didn't really read about it, but they were saying Eileen was more into her than she was into Eileen. Like Eileen was the one buying her things, the money that she would steal from the dead victim. She would buy things for her girlfriend. And that's what I think that's the only thing that kept her around. Her girlfriend probably didn't really want a lot to do with her either, because she was psycho, you know what I mean? But yeah, how can you blame one for being that psycho when all those bad things happen to you like that, you know? It's nuts. Like you said, the jail system failed her in a way. She should have got some sort of help.
But she claimed until her dying day, she proclaimed her love for Taria.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't even think she held it against because
it sounds like it was a using relationship on Taria.
Tyria, yeah. That's how they got her to come in. The police found Tyria and had her call Eileen and say, "Can you help me? They're accusing me of these murders. Can you help clear my name?" And Eileen was like, "Yeah, I did it." So
nice.
All right. Sorry to sidetrack you.
that's what we're all about.
Okay. Yeah, I've listened to a couple of your podcasts, and yeah, so I figured you'd forgive me.
And yet you still agreed to be on with us.
I can't pass up time with, a couple of women. I love being around women. So what can I say? But I'm married, so sorry, ladies. All right, so I guess it's my turn, huh? Well, let's talk about Jim Morrison of the Doors. Of the Doors, not and the Doors, and I'll get into that right now. In his biography, No One Here Gets Out Alive by Jerry Hopkins and Danny Sugarman, he actually made an announcer go back to the stage to correct himself when he announced Jim Morrison and the Doors. It's just the Doors. That's the name of the band that Jim was part of. And he was kind of a philosopher. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but there's the known and the unknown, and what separates the two are the Doors. And that's why he wanted to name it the Doors, because he's kind of like a philosopher. And then I read this in a Rolling Stones magazine article that Jim Morrison is part of the 27 Club. I don't know if you guys ever heard of that, musicians who died due to addiction or suicide or freak accidents. And I guess sometime in the 2000s, the list expanded to actors and authors. But the ones that I remember in the 27 Club was Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Kurt Cobain. They all met their fate. If you read the biography, No One Here Gets Out Alive, it has several instances of Jim's demented behavior. And that's why I put Jim in the book. Like I said, my book's kind of based off of Forrest Gump. Crazy is as crazy does instead of stupid is as stupid does. But anyway, Jimmy, he was most known for his rock and roll and things like that, but he definitely has a demented side to him. He had an incident when he was quite young. He's about 4 years old, and he was driving with his parents. They were moving from I forget where they were moving from and to, but they were in Albuquerque when they happened upon an overturned truck with a bunch of Pueblo Indians that were injured and dying. And so Jim claimed that one of these Indian spirits, he's only 4, mind you, he claimed that one of these Indian spirits jumped into his body. So I found that pretty intriguing. And you know how not all serial killers, but most serial killers have a high IQ.
Yeah.
Jimmy's IQ is that of 149. So he had a pretty good IQ. He drew several perverted pencil drawings at the age of 14. And I actually have the book, and I don't, it's probably easier for me to read it real quick to you than it would be for me to try to describe it. But if you ever want to read, or you can actually probably find the actual pictures online if you search hard enough.
Okay.
But at 14 years old, he was drawing elaborate pencil drawings of a man contorting and vomiting. Neglected kidneys caused this, is what, in quotations, that's what the title of this was. That doesn't mean much. But another showed a man with a Coca-Cola bottle for a penis, a mean-looking can opener for his testicles, one hand held out and dripping with slime, more of the slime hanging from his anus. A third drawing showed a man with an erect penis the size of a baseball bat, a small boy kneeling in front and holding on, licking his pointed teeth in anticipation. And so it goes on to say, Jim made hundreds of these drawings. When his mood was lighter, he and a friend of his would cut out cartoon characters from the Sunday Funnies and rearranged them on strips of paper, giving them new dialogue or captions. Again, all these themes were sexual or scatological, but they were imbued with sophistication and subtle humor unusual for just someone who was 14 years old. So that, all this leads me to believe that something must have happened to him at a young age. But
yeah, it sounds like a child who's been through sexual assault, right? You see a lot of stuff.
Right. So, and then also as he got a little older, he threatened one, and it's all in the No One Gets Out of Here Alive biography. I guess there's over 2 million copies in print right now. At least that's what my book says. And I got that a few years ago from my son, actually. He was my son, who's 23. I didn't think he knew anything about Jim Morrison. He was all into him. And I'm like, hey, you got to read this book. But anyway, Jim threatened one of his girlfriends that he would take a sharp knife and cut her face, leaving a nasty scar, so no one will look at her but him. Also, like in his poems, he wrote a lot of poems, which some of them turned into songs, and the visions of death and insanity are in a lot of those. So just looking at all that, it's kind of, I feel like he had, maybe he didn't kill anybody per se, but he must have had a bloodline or something. He threatened another girl named Rosanna with a carving knife. He actually bent her arm behind her, in a hammerlock, and put the blade to her stomach and told her he was going to cut her to see if she would bleed. Now that's a psycho move, if you ever ask me. The only thing, I don't know if he ever would have done it or not, but he was interrupted by one of his bandmates who walked in on him and was like, "What the heck are you doing?" And then he just kind of laughed it off.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
It's a lot dark in that man.
There really was, and a lot of people don't know that, but that's how he made it into my book. I figured, my guy helped him write a few songs, if you will, by the actions they did after they met. So he also made a 50-minute film. I don't know if you guys know about that or not, called It's entitled HWY, but it stands for Highway, and it's called An American Pastoral. And I don't know if everybody who's listening knows what pastoral means, but it's a work of literature portraying an idealized version of country life. So you want to take a guess at what the short film is about?
Some country life that's darker than we expect. They're on the highway killing people.
Kind of. I'll tell you, this Jim used to hitchhike some 200 miles in Florida from, I think it was from his college in Tallahassee all the way to Clearwater. We mentioned Clearwater earlier. I grew up right near there. I love Clearwater, by the way. But he used to hitchhike. And so it's about a hitchhiker. So it was shot in the spring and summer of 1969. So he was already a little famous. One of his albums came out, and it was filmed in the Mojave Desert and in LA. And I actually looked, you can find the movie on YouTube, but it has like I don't know, the time frame on the thing, and it's not, you can't barely hear it in some points, but I mean, you can look at it, you can see kind of what was going on. He actually drove his own Mustang in that movie. He was also the star of the movie. He directed it, and he wrote the damn thing himself. So he did all this stuff. But the 69 Mustang was given to him by the record company for his for commending him on his first album, which won a lot of awards. All right, and so let's see. In 1971, there was an interview. In an interview, Jim states it was more of an exercise for me and a warm up for something bigger. He's talking about the films still. And so what to me, what does that mean? It was more of an exercise for me and a warm up for something bigger. So maybe he was planning on going out hitchhiking and doing something crazy. That's the way I took it. All right. And so the plot, it shows Jim hitchhiking with a voiceover of Morrison talking about the injured Native American accident that he had when he was 4. And then you fast forward, and then it shows Jim as he makes a phone call to an American poet, Michael McClure, and tells him he killed the original driver. And the final shot showed Jim at the Whiskey A Go-Go bar on the Sunset Strip in LA. And it's funny that he winds up there because that's where the Doors actually got their start.
Okay.
So I don't know. Jim must have been mixing a little fiction into his movie or fact into his movie as well. I don't know. So years after Jim's death, there was an album that was released. It was called The American Prayer. And they had some of Jim's recordings set to music on that tape. And Jim states he killed a hitchhiker, but it was no big deal, as no one will ever find out. Now, I don't know if this was a snippet from his short film or if this is something he actually just did in the recording studio one day for fun. So I think it was probably a snippet from his film. And then one more fact, I guess that's pretty, let me see. I guess that pretty much screams serial killer to me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's pretty much all I got about Jim Morrison. I did tell you I was in the military though, right? Well, okay. So let's see. I was in the military and I'm a Navy guy. And his dad was a Navy guy. Jim Morrison's dad. He was actually retired as an admiral in the Navy. Cool fact about his dad, George Morrison, was actually involved. I don't know if you guys are history buffs or not, but the Gulf of Tonkin.
Yeah.
But you familiar with that? It was an incident in 1964 August, which escalated the Americans' involvement in the Vietnam War. Well, his dad was the commander of the U.S. naval forces operating in the Gulf at the time. So not that he pulled the trigger. I think he actually told him, hey, it's a big misunderstanding, but the U.S. wanted to get involved. And so the president's like, nah, there's no radar glitches. We're going for the jugular. We're getting involved. But you got to kind of attribute it to George for not standing up and saying, no, that's wrong. That's wrong. You know what I mean? So maybe he had a hand in a few, a million deaths, if you will. So, but it's definitely history. We go ahead and start talking about, before I get into James Huberty though, let me tell you one more thing about Jim Morrison's car. I already told you he received his 67 Ford Shelby GT Mustang. He actually gave it a name. It was called the Blue Lady, and the Blue Lady's in my book as well. And I'll tell you why in a minute. It's the same Mustang he uses in that short film, and he had to get the body fixed many times as he would crash it here and there. But anyway, he died in Paris from an overdose back in 1971, and the Mustang disappeared. And if you look it up online, you can find it too. A lot of people don't know, about that the Mustang actually has been missing in Ashton for years and years. They finally think they found it at an old junkyard. It got towed away, but that's not the real story, right? The real story's in my book. You'll have to read it to find out.
Makes one wonder, even if Jim Morrison didn't actually commit any crimes, if it was something that he was thinking about or leading up to.
Yeah, you know what I mean? It's just, I don't know. There's just too many weird things when he was younger, with the pictures. And there's some other stuff I left out. But there's a few other instances. I think he was on a bus one day and the bus driver was going to kick him out because he sat next to this like young underage girl. And I forget what he was saying or how he was looking at her, but the conversation didn't go too well with him and the bus driver. You know what I mean? So there's other little perverted things that Jim has done throughout his life that makes you wonder. James Oliver Huberty. He was a welder, and then he became a security guard. Something happened to him, and he couldn't weld anymore, so he had to settle on duty. He had I forget what the accident was. Maybe I should have done my homework a little better. Sorry about that. But you can look all this stuff up on Wikipedia. It's all over the internet, and I think they're actually, I don't know if they're doing a movie or they already did a movie, but about the San Ysidro massacre. You might never heard of him, but he was responsible for one of the most deadliest mass shootings known as the San Ysidro McDonald's Massacre. And this happened July 18th of 1984. He killed 21 people, children included, and he wounded 19 others. And at the time, in 1984, it was the deadliest mass shooting. And then 7 years later, someone killed 23 people and wounded 27 others in Killeen, Killeen, Texas. Mm-hmm. What a place to kill people, right? And this one was known as Luby's shooting. It happened in Luby's cafeteria. And I read somewhere now to date, San Ysidro is actually number 8 on the list of the most deadliest shootings. So that goes to tell you something.
Yeah.
All right. So anyway, 3 days before that massacre, James told his wife that he thought he had mental problems. Kind of like when Charles Whitman, he kept saying that there was something wrong with his brain before he went up on the tower and shot everybody. Kind of just threw that out there. Anyway, one day before the shootings, he called a San Diego mental health clinic, and he was asking for an appointment for the receptionist assured James that someone would he would get a call back in a few hours, but that call never came due to some misspellings and a sense of non-urgency on the operator's part. Like James, they ask questions like, do you think you want to kill somebody or do you want to kill yourself? And he was like, no, even though in the back of his mind, that's exactly what he wanted to do, is kill somebody. So she didn't see the sense of urgency in it. So they didn't really, I think they called after it happened. So anyway, the last day before the shooting, he spent most of the day at the zoo with his wife and his 2 daughters. And when they got home, he kissed his wife and he said goodbye. And I was always taught goodbye meant forever. My aunt told me that a long time ago. She said, never say goodbye, say see you later, because goodbye means forever.
Oh, wow.
Because that's what she told me. So anyway, he kissed his wife goodbye. And when she asked where he was going, he said, I'm going hunting for humans. That's what he told her. And then he told his oldest daughter, goodbye, I won't be back. And then around 4 p.m, he pulled into the McDonald's. And he was actually reported to going into a Big Bear supermarket. And then he went to the U.S. Postal Branch. But then for some reason, he wound up at McDonald's. And let's see, I was careful not to, in my book, I was careful not to use any victims' names, and, but if you read how all the events unfolded as James walked into the McDonald's, my guy's named John Goodman. James enters into the McDonald's and pointed his shotgun at a 16-year-old employee named John Arnold. And at the same time, the assistant manager, he was I think his name was Gil Flores or Guillermo Flores. He shouted, and in my book, I have a female shouting this, but in real life, it was a male. It was the assistant manager. He shouted, hey, John, that guy's going to shoot you. I don't know. I guess I kind of gave away what's going on in my book, but my guy, John, was, in the line at McDonald's and turns around. And in my book, it says the shotgun didn't go off. And in real life, the same thing happened. That shotgun did not go off the first time he shot it. But he was shooting it at a different John because, of course, my John isn't real. All right. So after
different John, did that John end up making it out of the shooting?
Okay, I'll get into that right now. After the assistant manager screamed, and according to the 16-year-old boy himself, because he did live, James Huberty pulled that trigger, and like I said, nothing happened. So John Arnold, the 16-year-old boy, he did live, but he thought it was a joke at first, so he just started to walk away, and he got shot in the chest and in the arm, and he became one of the 19 that were wounded. I mean, it's a horrifying story to say the least, but you can read all about it online, like I said. And I actually named in my book, I call this chapter the God Complex because of the misfire. But again, that misfire actually really did happen in real life. So that's just a little Easter egg for you, just like Jimmy's Blue Lady, little Easter egg there. Because a lot of people don't know that. And that's why I think when people read my book, if they're not, I should have maybe been a little more tactful about certain parts so people would get that. But if you're familiar with these people, you'll get it. But if you're not, you won't. I think a lot of true crimers will get it. But if you're not a true crimer, you might not get the whole thing. But I still think it's interesting just because of how it's all put together and how John Goodman's mind acts because of these instances, how he dealt with these instances. So I think that's pretty much everything I got to say. And again, I'm not glorifying any of the real real life criminals in my book, but I'm just, like I said, I'm just using them away so the reader can see how John Goodman evolves.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
And that's something that, I mean, people who are into true crime and especially serial killers, I think a lot of it tends to be, okay, but why? Why did this person do the things they did? How can a person do the things they did? And it is that background that people want to know about. But anyway, that's what people want to know. I mean, it's about the inner workings of them. It's about what can make somebody who maybe is just like you in other ways turn around and do these things that we see as horrific and completely abnormal. So, I mean, that is interesting in your book that it traces that. Here are the formative things that happen in this life.
Okay, there's a whole nother story within this story. You know, you've gotten part of what makes John tick. I just didn't tell you who he's talking to and who these people are that he's talking to. And I hope you guys will take interest enough to read my book. Everybody who's out there listening.
Absolutely. And it's just to throw it out there, although I'll repeat it at the end. It's available at Amazon, right?
Yes. Yeah. Kindle Unlimited. Readers can read it for free. It's also, you know, some people don't like Amazon books. So if you want to get the paperback copy, you can also find it on Barnes and Noble's website as well.
Perfect.
And don't pay any attention, if you're a true crimer, don't pay any attention to some of my, what do you call them? My lower stars, if you will.
Never.
I'm not saying it's a 5-star book, but it's definitely not a 1-star book. Okay.
Well, and to throw it out here, didn't your book win an award?
Actually, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it sure did. It won the silver ELIT. It won a silver medal award for ELIT Book Awards of this year. So yeah, thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah. So
that makes me feel better. Every time I get a bad review, I just look at that, you know, award on my wall and I'm like, okay, you had to have done something right.
Well, and the thing about any sort of dark story is I do read the reviews on it for other people. I try not to read my own reviews, but they say don't do it. And I'm like, but it's right there. But I look at those because if the complaint is, for example, like on Stephen Graham Jones is an horror author. He writes some really extreme, dark stuff. And I go and read his because if they're like, this is reprehensible, and then I'm like, oh, I'm gonna read that. All right, thank you for that review. So some of those bad reviews actually sell people on books too. So yeah, it all depends. All right, so I'm doing Joe Ball. I'm not going to tell you his nickname yet because he actually had a couple, but there's a major one. My sources were the New York Daily News, Wikipedia, Blue Canary, and Murderpedia. All right. Joe Ball was born January 7th, 1896 in Elmendorf, Texas. He was the second oldest of 8 children. He enlisted to fight in World War I in 1917, returning in 1919. His dad thought his son would go into the same business as him, which was cotton, big in Texas, right? In fact, his father had built the first cotton gin in their city, and they were one of the town's founding families. The word changed Joe, though. He'd spent 2 years fighting in Europe. While he did initially start working for his dad, he started bootlegging during the Prohibition. He also married a young woman named Clara Christine Wayne, is how I'm saying it. It's Wahne, in 1921, but they divorced not long after. I couldn't find the actual date. I didn't do a deep dive seeking it. When liquor became legal, he stuck with the career, but he opened an actual bar, saloon is actually how they referred to it. And that was the Sociable Inn in 1933. He bought the land and he built his inn and then he opened it. And folks came there not just to drink, but to gamble. There was a piano, so there was music. They bet on cockfights there sometimes, and there was dancing and revelry. Then he said, well, I need something to pull people in because he was making more money during the Prohibition selling this alcohol, which he would drive around a Ford Model A and he just had this big barrel. So the barrel comes back into play later, but he then distributed from that barrel. So anyway, he says, I need to find a way to pull people in here. I'm doing okay, but I need more. So he built a pool behind the saloon and he went and caught 5 alligators and put them in there. So to entertain his customers, he'd actually capture small animals and throw them in for the alligators to kill. So strays.
My God.
Yeah. And people actually would pay to watch it.
Ah.
So he's not the only twisted one that was there. So cats, dogs, mostly raccoons. People said there was no animal safe if it came anywhere near the saloon. Joe was quite the ladies' man, despite torturing animals, with several girlfriends at once. The first was one of his barmaids, Minnie Goddard. They dated for about 3 years, with her helping to run the bar eventually. But he started dating Dolores Goodwin while he was still seeing Minnie, and he fell a bit harder for Dolores. I think he was over Minnie. Summer 1937, Minnie disappeared. Joe said she'd run away with a black man, that's not the word he used, to have his baby. That man's baby, not Joe's. He soothed its pain by marrying Dolores in September, so he wasn't very bothered. In January, she was in an accident, Dolores was, that caused her to lose an arm to amputation. And in April, she had disappeared. As he and Hazel Brown had been getting it on during the short marriage, he was once again able to ease his deep-seated pain at the loss of his wife with some heavy petting. Until, of course, Hazel disappeared too, directly after having opened a new bank account, which she left untouched when she disappeared. So the money was all still there. It was the day before that she'd opened the account. It all unraveled when the police showed up to the saloon on September 24th, 1938, asking Joe about a barrel he'd left in his sister's barn that smelled like rotting meat and had disappeared because people were complaining about it. They'd already questioned him about Minnie's disappearance previously, as well as a woman named Julia Turner, who it sounds like had been a barmaid there. She kept being mentioned, but there wasn't much information on her, which was frustrating. But both sets of parents had reported their daughters missing. And so each time the police would come, they would question him because they'd been barmaids there. But even now, restaurant and bar staff are very transient. So you can't pin something on somebody because, say, a barmaid worked there for a month and then disappeared.
Right.
So anyway, he talked himself out of it each time. No problem. But this time he knew he was in trouble because they wanted to take him to San Antonio, which was only about 15 minutes away from Elmendorf. And they wanted to question him there. So he says, all right, well, just let me close up. Let me go do this really quick before you take me, and then I'll go. And he walks over to the register. He opens it, and he's got a .45 hidden inside. And first he waved it at them, but he turned it on himself and shot himself. And there was a dispute as to whether he shot himself in the chest or the head. Police were able to question Clifton Wheeler, who had been working for Joe since his post-wartime bootlegging. Clifton buckled pretty fast. He told them that Hazel had been in the barrel, but that when neighbors started to complain, Joe had forced him to help him take her body to a riverbank. And there they cut up the body with an axe and they buried her and they burned her skull. Clifton took police to the grave, stating Joe had killed her because she confronted him about Minnie's disappearance, saying she knew he'd killed her. In fact, it said that he just straight up told her and she didn't believe him at first. She wanted to leave him, and she apparently thought the best way to go about that was to threaten a man who had killed a previous girlfriend, which always confuses me.
Yeah.
But okay. So Clifton was also there when Minnie was killed. She'd become pregnant. So she really was pregnant, but it was Joe's. And Joe didn't want to get serious with her. So he took her for a day at the beach in Corpus Christi, Texas. And he told her to look at the sunset and shot her in her head.
Oh my God.
So there they buried her in the sand. And Clifton was able to lead them to that body also. An alternate source stated that he told Clifton to take a hike, asked Minnie to take off her bathing suit, and then he shot her on the beach. So there was one that said they were on a boat. It makes more sense that they were on the beach. Clifton didn't know anything about the woman Joe had married, though. As far as he knew, Joe hadn't murdered Dolores. Clifton ended up serving 2 years for being an accomplice and opening a bar after he got out. Unfortunately for him, he was too notorious and was chased out of town. Locals hearing about the murder decided that the car accident must not have happened. They thought Joe must have cut her arm off to feed it to his pets in the pool, or that an alligator had bitten it off accidental, there'd been an accident. But the kicker is they eventually found Dolores. She was jailed for drunk and disorderly in San Diego. And she had gone there because her pregnant sister had asked her to come out and help. And so she'd gone out there. And also it sounds like she kind of wanted to get away from Joe and start things over. And it said, one source said that she was remarried living there, but there's no divorce as far as I can tell. So I don't know if that was true. And it was just one source. Not to be dissuaded by fact, locals went all out, growing the rumors to include Joe having killed others in order to feed them to his alligators. He came to be known as the Alligator Man, or the Butcher of Elmendorf, or the Bluebeard of South Texas. And here's where information splits. So he technically may not be a serial killer. In fact, it probably sounds like he probably isn't, but he's rumored to have killed about 30 other women, mostly barmaids that were passing through town and wouldn't be missed or tracked to him, and feeding them to his alligators. The articles I read stated that women were going missing, but they just kept saying, and then other women started going missing. And I was like, what women?
Yeah. Who?
And I couldn't find that. So with no specific names, take it with a grain of salt. The fact that he buried the women he's known to have killed makes it seem less likely that he was feeding women to the alligators, because if he thought of that, you'd think he would have done that with his latest victims, unless he found that was too hard. But admittedly, it's more fun to believe that he was feeding people. I was like, that's a missed opportunity, Joe. So while police examining the bar found a bloodied axe and meat remnants when they were first going through it, it all turned out to be animal, not human. And it was because he was processing food to be fed to the gators. They actually mostly ate horse, but it sounds like he had an axe covered with like fur and stuff. So he was killing things to throw in there too. I will say for the record that restaurant and bar staff, like I've said before, are transient population. It would not be out of the question for someone to murder them, kind of in the same way H.H. Holmes was able to find so many victims in Chicago. They were transient. There's no way to track them to a specific place. So unless they lived there and had an established life, pretty easy victims. So we'll never actually know if Joe Ball killed more than his 2 girlfriends, but it seems most likely that he didn't. Or there would be more actual names involved in the stories, such and such went missing. I'm still curious about Julia Turner, because as far as I could tell, she wasn't found. And they did track down some of the women they said were said to be missing. So those women were found elsewhere. So again, that still leaves others that were supposedly reported missing. There's supposed to be a teenage boy that went missing that hung out there a lot, but again, no name for him. But Julia Turner's family were actively looking for her, and I did not find that she was found. So there could have been at least a third victim, which would qualify him as a serial killer, by the way. And to close it out, the alligators were sent to the San Antonio Zoo after his death, so they got to retire in peace. Perhaps they were bored by the food they were getting. Depends on if there had been human meat before, but they were taken care of. They weren't killed or anything. So I thought that was good. And that's the story of Joe Ball, the Alligator Man. My husband's from Texas, so I was like, hey, I'm doing another Texas serial killer. Because I already did, Whitman and all that good stuff from like Texas breeds them, but California really breeds them if you want to go there.
Yeah.
The Pacific Northwest breeds them.
And they all want to see Colorado.
That's right.
Joe Ball, of course, I forgot to tell you, he was mentioned in my book. And also you said you did a show on Joseph DeAngelo. He's also part of this book as well. So there's 2 more killers for you that I forgot to mention.
Yeah. So having done Joseph DeAngelo, have you ever listened to the Murder Squad podcast?
No.
Okay. Paul Holes is one of the co-hosts of that, and he was instrumental in finding DeAngelo. He's actually the one who had the idea to go to the genetic, to start investigating DNA to see if they could track down family members.
No, he didn't. Somebody in my book did, but okay. I won't argue the point.
All right, there you go. It was him.
He solved it.
That's right. Well, we want to thank you again for coming on. It was fun. It was nice having all these stories and hearing about how you combined all of this for background in your book and how you laid that out a little bit. People need to read it to find out more about it. But thank you for coming on here.
No, thank you. Thank you. And I enjoyed both your stories. It's been a while since I did my research on any of the killers. After I wrote my book, I just put it all away in the closet.
Right.
But yeah, some of these, I forgot some of the nicknames, like the Bluebeard. I forget what you said. I forgot already. Yeah, the Bluebeard of South Texas. And what was the other one?
It's like, hold on. It has the town name in it.
The Butcher of
The Butcher of Elmendorf.
Elmendorf, yeah. And the Alligator Man. It's all good. Good stuff.
'cause
Thank you.
The Butcher of Elmendorf just doesn't roll off your tongue like Alligator Man.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. It's a more fun word. Butcher's always a fun word, but
Yes.
so just a reminder out to people. Our guest today was John H. Mudgett, and he has sponsored this episode. His book is Crazy Is As Crazy Does, The Life of a Serial Killer. And you can find that at Barnes & Noble or Amazon. And we will, of course, have the links up. You can find it on our website or on our Facebook page. So you'll be able to find those. And what is our question to close it out?
Our question this week is, because now there are some people who listen to this because they know us and they like us. But a lot of people who listen to this, it's because they're interested in true crime and serial killers. So our question is, what is the first case that got you interested in serial killers or unsolved murders? We'll say it could be either one. Although we did talk a lot about serial killers today.
That's true.
Did you catch? Okay, you know my name's a pseudonym, right?
Oh, I didn't catch it. Is it
John H. Mudgett is a
Mudgett?
pseudonym.
Sounds like H.H. Holmes. What was his?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. That's
All right.
that's why I did that. That's why I did that. Because if you read the book too, you might think this guy could really be real. That's why I did it like that.
Oh, I love that. And no, I didn't catch it until you said there was something to catch.
Well, I got Mudgett and I was like, no, I'm just making things up in my head.
No, you weren't. See, you got it. But anyway, thanks again. I'll let you guys go.
And thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
And
All
thank
right,
you to our
thank
listeners
you.
as well. Talk to everybody next week.
Yep.
Bye.
Awesome. Bye.